A new report released by former President Trump's chief pollster details the cause behind his 2020 election defeat. The analysis was written by Tony Fabrizio. The Florida-based pollster has worked for Mr. Trump for years. His findings were reportedly shared among campaign advisors late in 2020. The autopsy revealed Mr. Trump's unfounded claims of voter fraud and ballot stuffing actually hurt his re-election chances, with voters reportedly finding the former president as dishonest and untrustworthy. The study focused on 10 critical battlegrounds that helped the Trump campaign to victory in 2016. However, in 2020, the former president lost support in 5 of those states. This loss of traction was caused by a declining popularity among several key demographics that had propelled Mr. Trump into the White House 4 years earlier. For more, let's bring in Politico reporter Alex Isenstadt, who has been covering this story. Hi there, Alex. Thanks very much for being with us. So this is really interesting to take a look back. This post-mortem report reveals a significant drop-off in several of the key demographics that boosted Mr. Trump to the White House, as we said, in 2016. So what were those groups, Alex? With whom did he lose the most support?
Well, it's really interesting. One of the groups that he really lost a lot of support with were essentially white voters, and white voters over the age of 65, and white voters who were living in the suburbs. And it's really interesting because it's those white voters, particularly those over the age of 65, that propelled Trump to the White House in 2016. He really, their support for him in 2016 was huge for him. But as 2020 wore on, a lot of them soured on him, according to this analysis. And at least part of it has to do with his management of the coronavirus pandemic.
Right. So that was going to be my next question. Which key issues led to the decline in support of President Trump, former President Trump, ahead of Election Day?
According to this memo by Tony Fabrizio, by far and away the most important issue to voters was the coronavirus pandemic and resolving the pandemic. And by and large, voters did not approve of Trump's handling of the crisis. And they basically said that they trusted Biden to handle it more than Trump. You know, what's interesting is that going into this election, Trump made a bet, which was that the voters wanted to reopen the economy, and that the economy would be hugely important to them in terms of navigating the coronavirus at the same time as navigating the coronavirus. But if you look at this survey, what it shows is that voters overwhelmingly said that the resolving the coronavirus, fighting the pandemic, was more important than the economy and reopening.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that I remember being discussed in those weeks leading up to Election Day itself. But, you know, something else we wondered about was how late deciders would go. So 1 in 10 voters decided who they were voting for in the month ahead of the election. Contrary to the Trump campaign's initial beliefs, late voters wound up favoring President Biden. Why is that, Alex?
Well, what's interesting is when you look at this study is that 90% of all voters made up their mind before basically the month before October, essentially. Voters were really locked in. They knew who they were going to support. But, you know, there was only 10% or so of voters who made up their mind at the last minute. And one of the problems that the Trump campaign faced is that they decided they had a cash crunch over the summer. They decided to save whatever money they had until the final month. Well, that may have ended up being a miscalculation because by October, nearly everyone had already made up their mind.
And, you know, Mr. Trump's off-the-cuff rhetoric helped him win office in 2016. And during the 2020 campaign, several members of his team said they felt the best thing they could do is let Mr. Trump, you know, essentially be himself and continue with that same strategy. But, Alex, what did the report say about that in this past election?
Well, what's interesting is that one of the main reasons Trump lost this election, the memo concludes, is that voters didn't see him as being honest or trustworthy. And that was a big problem for him because by a fairly substantial margin, voters saw Biden as the person who would be more honest and trustworthy. So, in other words, no matter how much voters may have liked Trump's policies, they had issues with him personally, and that was a huge impediment to him winning re-election.
Finally, following the Trump presidency, we've seen this kind of transformation, some might say, or continuing evolution take place within the Republican Party. Some might call it soul searching, but some of Mr. Trump's most vocal supporters have included people like conspiracy theorist Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, whom the House is currently working to strip of her committee assignments. Alex, what impact is this having on the party and Republican support moving forward? This kind of discussion very openly about a person holding office that believes in these kinds of unfounded conspiracy theories.
This is the question that Republicans are wrangling with right now as they deal with what's essentially kind of a civil war. And, you have guests like the one you just had on with Senator Cassidy and others who want the party to move in a bit of a different direction than the one we saw under Trump, who believe that in order to win elections, they need to become a little bit more mainstream and to push conspiracy theorists like Marjorie Taylor Greene away. But then you have a lot of very conservative House Republicans who are afraid of backing away from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and are afraid of alienating people like Donald Trump, because he still has, despite his loss, despite everything that's written in this memo, he still has a large control over the party. And so this is the real tension point. This is what Republicans are dealing with right now.
All right, Alex Isenstadt. Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you.